Today's commentary will be about 2 episodes from season 3, and I was looking back at a few of my other videos, and I totally forgot my speech communications class. One of actually 2 classes, such classes that I took during my years at university. Well, I have 2 bachelor's degrees, so this would have been the one that I obtained in the 1990s, the late 1990s. And I'm just thinking back to that class and how just egregiously badly I broke a lot of the rules that go along with making public speeches when making these videos. And I see I'm on a couple of my other videos. I've got my Forgotten Gems from the Twilight Zone book, and I'm like flipping through it and so forth, like not really looking for anything in particular. But it's like nervous flipping through the pages when I'm not nervous at all. But anyhow, wanted to, it's like these videos are now kind of starting to take some sort of a symmetry, some sort of a shape. And I think about, which ones I'm wanting to do. Of course, I've got 156 of these things that I have to get through eventually. And, sometimes I'm trying to do them in groups of 2 for these videos, and I think about which 2 I want to do at any given time. But anyway, just back to my thing about egregiously breaking rules of like things that you're not supposed to do while making speeches and so on and so forth. I went to this Toastmasters club. If any of you are familiar with that, they teach people about how to make really effective speeches. And I never joined their club for some reason, but I remember I went to like 2 or 3 meetings, and there was a person like who was a scribe, and it's all very regimented and orderly, and like 5 different people give speeches during the course of the evening, and if not speeches, then presentations, and they get graded on them. And I know one person during the evening, after the end of the evening, they announce who did the best and who did the worst, and they count up stuff like I counted 32 ums in your speech. I counted 10 and ums. I counted 6, but and then 17. Well, all these things that you can't do when you're making public speeches. So I'm going to try to make a conscious effort to really work on my diction for one thing, as if I were like an actor, which I'm not, but also getting rid of and so please bear with me. I'm going to get better. I know how to do it. It's just it's been so long since I did, and I'm kind of out of practice. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about one more Pallbearer and also the little people. One more Pallbearer, of course, is from season 3 of Twilight Zone, written by Serling and starring Joseph Wiseman, directed by none other than the great Lamont Johnson, who was a veteran TV director. I never knew him well, but he was supposed to come to our Twilight Zone convention in 2004, but he lived up in Monterey, wonderful, beautiful city for the well-to-do, up a ways north, not near, I'm in Los Angeles, it's up past Santa Barbara ways. But no, he couldn't come for some reason he didn't make it to the convention. But he spoke highly of that episode, and he said that Joseph Wiseman really got into the role and loved doing it. I think I was thinking about this episode earlier today, because I remember watching it with Arlene Martell. I think I mentioned on Dead Man's Shoes, in fact I know I talked about it, about how she loved watching that episode because her friend Joan Marshall was in it. So this one we watched, I think, right afterwards, right after that one. It was on the same DVD. And she saw this, and the opening shot of Joseph Wiseman, walking out of the elevator, and I'm sure he was a real life smoker, as everybody smoked in those days, but he blows this wonderful cloud of smoke, not to promote smoking, but it's like this guy knew how to smoke for the camera. He got this long, cigarette holder, I think, and really knew how to blow it. And she said, you know what? He used to live in my apartment building in New York. And I said, you're kidding. This guy from Dr. No, from the James Bond films. I believe that was the first, although I'm not a James Bond fan. I said, he lived in your apartment building? She said, yes. And I said, did you know him? And she said, no, he never would talk. Said he'd get on the elevator just like he got off the, he'd come on there very aloof. He didn't make any eye contact. He didn't want to talk to anybody. Some people are just like that. They're shy, and actors are oftentimes like that. They're the complete opposite of what they are on screen or on stage. And Wiseman was, if I'm not mistaken, a magnet, rather legendary in the New York theater department. He lived, I'm sure he was in a good number of plays on and off Broadway. He seemed like a very theatrical actor based on his performance on Twilight Zone, just extremely aloof and so forth. So anyway, but I don't know if, he was necessarily like that with everybody, but he definitely was, as he was getting onto elevators with people he didn't know. So anyway, the whole thing, the story, as most people know, of One More Pallbearer is kind of a simple one that was written by Serling and kind of crafted into this rather interesting teleplay of this guy who is going to stage kind of an apocalyptic ending for, similar to what happened in Time Enough at Last. So he calls these three people who have wronged him in the past, which is interesting in itself. I mean, I'd love to do that. I mean, I think everybody probably has people in their lives who they would love to bring to trial or bring to justice or see them again so they could say, God, I've got a couple bosses who I'd love to do that with. Bring them into the same room with me again, and just, years later as we get older and wiser, just love to rake them across the coals. So he does that with these three people because he's got power and prestige and status as a wealthy owner of this Raiden building, this skyscraper. And he's constructed this bomb shelter in the basement of his own building. And, very cleverly has all of them come and tells them that the world is going to be coming to an end. So he stages the whole thing, and then, needless to say, none of them apologize or atone for any of it. And the three people are all kind of, they're rotten sort of people. But they're played well by the actors. That was Trevor Bardette and Gage Clark and Katherine Squire, also, who were all very good character actors. And of course, Katherine Squire was on In His Image the next year. They brought her back for that. And I've seen her on a lot of different shows, and she doesn't always play the same kind of character, but she's this kind of got the the kind of she's very good at these nasal sort of whiny characters. And then of course on In His Image, she plays this pamphlet pushing religious zealot who gets shoved, and not even in Act 1, it's in the opening teaser. How many times do we see that on Twilight Zone? Not too many times of somebody getting killed before the thing even starts, before Act 1 even starts. So anyhow, needless to say, this this thing really doesn't go as planned, and then we see Raiden up at the in the middle of this apocalyptic, and he's gone mad. It hasn't really happened. But he's up on the main floor of the building again, and he's like, obviously he looks like he's drunk or something like that. But he's just clearly out of his mind, and the cop is there and, telling, it's okay, it's okay. And he's telling everybody, move along, there's nothing here to see. So anyway, that episode was interesting. And of course, Serling, in constructing this thing, of course, made an example out of what happens to people when they really get drunk with power, like Paul Raiden was. And pick your favorite, not politician. I'm not going to name any politicians because I'm not going to get in trouble. But not that I would, but or think of anybody who has kind of arrived in a certain seat of power, who just gets corrupted by it all. And this is what Serling did so eloquently and so magnificently and with such virtuosity, creating these teleplays, that are metaphoric. He's not naming any names, but he's, referring to all these people. And please forgive me for making a comparison to The Outer Limits, but that show did it really even more so. I was watching some episodes of that here within the last week, and it's like, this is what was happening in the 60s. The political climate was changing, really so much. But be it politicians or be it anybody who's become corrupt as they've gotten wealthy. and so one more Pallbearer was a story about that. So moving on to the little people. So again, we've got a story about corruptness that happens with people who are powerful. Only in this case, the person who becomes so corrupt is just kind of sick in the head, and he's not a wealthy man or anything. So, just to back up one little bit, it looks like some of the sets for the apocalypse, the end of the world there, as hallucinated by Raiden. It looks like some of those sets were taken from like leftovers from Time Enough at Last, or they set them up in the same way. But I've never read anything like to confirm that. But they kind of look that way. That the ending of Time Enough at Last was, of course, set up with a hydrogen bomb type thing, and this thing that was set up by Raiden is, of course, just all in his mind. So anyway, but the little people with Claude Akins and Joe Maross playing Fletcher and Craig, these two astronauts that came presumably from Earth, and they land in Death Valley, or someplace that looks like it. It was filmed in Death Valley. They landed there, and Craig finds this society, this underworld of, not underworld, but this second society of microscopic people. So, needless to say, he is kind of a malcontent who wants some sort of power that he probably can't have, but now he gets a chance to have it. Remind you of anybody? Not that I'm thinking of anybody in particular. And now he gets all the power in the world and has it for a brief time, and then everything comes crashing down. Literally, they build a monument to this guy, which is a very impressively designed, like concrete statue. Twilight Zone did so much with doing life masks and everything of the actors' faces and making statues or dummies out of them or what have you. And this was no exception. And then, so ultimately, Claude Akins takes off in the spaceship. Claude Akins as Fletcher takes off in the spaceship, leaving Craig there because he's decided he's not going to go with him because he's now, king of the universe. So, ultimately, they oust him. And what precedes that is the arrival of these two even bigger astronauts. So now we've got this society of microscopic little people, and then we've got Fletcher and Craig, and then these two giants. So they come along, and they find this guy Craig, who's saying, "I'm the god," and they see him down there, pathetically screaming and crying, and they pick him up, this microscopic little specimen. Forget him, throw him back, and all these rocks come crashing down on him, and they're like, "We landed someplace where there's nothing to do here." So anyway, that was another interesting kind of essay about Serling essay about power. What happens to people when they get into those positions. So an interesting thing also about that one, other than that it was filmed in Death Valley, and actually I know I have a friend who actually went to Death Valley to specifically look for the filming locations of the Twilight Zone episodes and found them. And you can actually see a link on twilight.zonemuseum.com to a video that shows those, and it's compared with screenshots from it's amazing how little in, I guess at that time it was 50 years, and now it's 61 or 62 years, that those landscapes in those rock formations and everything in Death Valley, how little they changed. They basically look the same for obvious reasons. It's the wilderness, no trees there, but it's it's out in the middle of no place, and with only the elements of the sun and the wind and just acting upon them, but still, there's nothing really to change much, which was just amazing. So you got to watch that video. As a final little comment and aside about the little people, there's the music within it. The stock music cues that were used are very well placed, and they were written, most of them were written by a man named Wilfred Josephs with an S, and he was an English composer who actually composed a lot for television. I don't know how many film scores he did, but he was a prolific composer of classical music, and he also wrote television series themes and incidental music for them. He didn't write specifically this music for Twilight Zone, but there are some really good and effective cues, and I think some of the names of them are like Mausoleum and Safecrackers. And anyway, that book by Martin Grams, which is an incredible book, talks about lists all those musical cues that came from the CBS stock music library. So this Wilfred Josephs was not an American composer. He was British. He was a Brit. But they got these musical cues and integrated them into the thing, and it works out very well. So I think both of those episodes, One More Pallbearer and The Little People, kind of go hand in hand. They were similar, and kind of run-of-the-mill, par for the course sort of episodes. Not really all that super, nothing too especially great about them, but they kind of complement each other well. And by the end of the third year, it's like Twilight Zone had done so much, it was kind of starting to repeat itself a little bit. And I think Serling was, by that point, a little bit worn out in the writing. Never mind the fact that he had a whole nother 2 seasons of episodes to write. He didn't write all of them, but he wrote his share, whatever that was. It was at least half of he wrote at least half of the show for every given season, and then other people did the other half. So anyhow, that does it for One More Pallbearer and The Little People.